Well, hello everyone. Welcome back to another presentation from the Canadian Immigration Institute and Holthe Immigration Law. I'm here with my fellow immigration lawyer and colleague, Alicia. How are you, Alicia?
I'm well. It's a beautiful day here in Alberta. Sun is shining and it's very warm.
Excellent. Well, we apologize for being a little bit late. It has been one of those days, and if you watched the live stream that I did this morning, you'll see it hasn't been the most spectacular day for me, but I am excited to be here with Alicia to talk about this new program that the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program has launched. And I'll be honest, not with a lot of fanfare, but I think they probably should have. And so let's slide over here, and we'll see. We've got a little presentation this time that we're going to use to help drive our discussion here. And so we'll work through that. Once again, I am Mark Holthe, and I'm a Canadian immigration lawyer practicing in the wonderful city, or out of the wonderful city of Lethbridge, Alberta. And Alicia, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Alicia Backman-Beharry and I'm an immigration lawyer practicing out of the city of Calgary in Alberta.
So we are Alberta-based immigration lawyers. So this is our baby. The AINP is our wheelhouse, and we're excited to share a little bit of information. But let's be honest, the last week I had a chance to talk to the program director, Joshua Maldonado, who's now the acting program director for the AINP. And they didn't have a lot of information. They'd said at the time that there were 30 applications that were submitted, but at the end of the day, there's still a lot that we're going to feel, through the process and try to sort out as we go forward. And we've definitely identified some questions that we want people to be aware of that we need to sort out ourselves. And so we'll see how this all plays out. All right. For those of you who are unsure where to find the basic core information on the program, it's all right here on the Alberta website and this is all within the Alberta Express Entry stream. And Alicia, you've got to dig for this a little bit to find it. It's not right out there for everybody to see if you go to the application streams here.
Yes. Yeah. So it is important to note there are different streams within the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program. And so be really careful when you're looking through the website. There's kind of two general classifications on that main page. It's got the Alberta Opportunity Stream, which is the AOS, or the old-fashioned kind of paper-based application. It's not technically paper anymore, but that's what they call it because it's got a much longer processing time. And then there's the second category, which is the Alberta AINP Express Entry stream. And that's what we're going to be drilling down and discussing further today, because within the Alberta Express Entry stream, there's a subset, which is now the Accelerated Tech Pathway.
Yeah,
so that's one of the
in
subsets.
right here. You'd almost miss it if you weren't watching for it. Yeah. And so, yes, so that's where you find it. All right. Well, let's take a couple seconds here. Now, I'm not sure with the way we've got things set up, how much room we have here with everybody connecting in, but we'll give a couple shout outs here. So we've got Rocky who's here. We'll slide this right down into this spot and we'll pull up the questions. Hopefully we can get them to squeeze in here as we're doing our presentation. And the fun part about this is I'm going to move this up here and make a little bit more room for everybody here. Okay, perfect. So Rocky, good to have you here. We've got our fellow compadre Igor who's checked in. It's good to see you, Igor. Thanks for giving us a shout out. And we've got Himshika here as well, and a bunch of other people, even Shane. Hey, Shane, good to see you connecting in. So just a few shout outs. We will definitely get to Q&As once we get through the presentation and we have a chance to talk about everything that's transpired, and kind of give everybody a little bit of an overview. This live that we're doing today is all about, like Alicia said, it's all about the tech. the tech program right here, the Accelerated Tech. And so we just wanted to give a few shout outs to everybody there. We've got Anastasia and a whole bunch of other people that are connecting in here. So I just wanted to give all of you guys a shout out and let you know that we hear you, and hold your questions off. And then we will dive into this, all of the questions after we go through our presentation. All right. Okay. We'll adjust this one here a little bit. Wow. There we go. Interesting. Okay, let's do this, Alicia. Let's dive in and we'll switch over to our presentation, and let's talk about this new program.
Absolutely.
All right. So
just,
go
get
ahead.
situated, just make sure that you're looking at the differences between Alberta Opportunity Stream, which is the AOS or the old paper-based, what they call paper-based stream, versus the AINP Express Entry stream that has a subset within it now of this new Accelerated Tech Pathway. So that's where we're at. And the first things we're going to want to cover is, well, what's this program about? Who's eligible for it? And then we'll get into a few more details about eligibility and the documents and requirements that people will need to start working on sooner rather than later to be able to prepare for this application stream.
All right. So one of the things we want to identify is that there are options in Alberta, but the Alberta Opportunity Stream is taking an eternity. And if you're living and working in Alberta, the AOS is a good option for you. But when it comes to fast pathways, at least faster pathways, anything tied to the Express Entry Stream is always, always better if you can fit within this. But when it comes to, the fastest pathways to PR for anyone, Alberta bound, this, anything within the Express Entry Stream is the direction that you want to look.
Well, and practically too, it might be the only option right now because, of course, there have been no federal skilled worker draws. So under the skilled worker program, there haven't been any invitations to apply under CEC or federal skilled worker, but there have been invitations to apply issued under the provincial nominee programs. And so if this is you, if you are stuck and there haven't been any CEC or FSW draws, then maybe going through this AINP route or hoping to have an application get nomination through this AINP Express Entry route is the only way to actually practically have your application move forward right now.
Yeah, everything is stalled out. There's so much, and we're going to focus on the tech pathway today, but there is so much to unpack when it comes to the current world of immigration and the options that are available. All right, so from here, what we're going to do is we're just going to shift over and we're going to talk just a little bit about kind of the landscape of Express Entry and some of the requirements, and then dive a little bit deeper into the tech pathway. And it's important to understand how this all shakes down to start with, how Alberta treats people through the Express Entry process, at least through their stream. You need to understand that basic component before you can dive in deeper to the tech. So let's start off with that. So as far as getting through the gate right now and even making yourself eligible, Alicia, what do we have here?
Yeah, so this is different than AOS. You can't just submit an application. You have to meet the general Express Entry requirements first. So you have to have actually met either Canadian experience class or federal skilled worker or federal skilled trades. And that's not one we usually talk about quite as much because there's a lower volume. But some of these occupations that are on the Accelerated Tech Pathway are also trades occupations. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of plays out. But in order to meet the Express Entry requirements, you have to have an active profile. And so whenever somebody goes in and creates their Express Entry profile, they're going to get their CRS score, and that CRS score has to be at least 300 points. So minimum eligibility, CEC, FSW, FST, plus an active Express Entry profile federally with a CRS of 300 points. So those are things you have to have in order to even be considered for the Express Entry AINP streams. The next thing too is that if you're looking at Express Entry, AINP, it's kind of a broader umbrella. But if you're specifically wanting to look at the tech pathways, then there's a very specific list of which occupations will be considered by the AINP if you're looking at accelerated tech. So be really careful about your primary occupation. when you do your express entry application, you have to select what you are going to be assessed against as your primary occupation. And that's going to have to match what you're going to be applying for or hoping to be assessed against under accelerated tech. Because if that primary knock on your general federal express entry profile doesn't meet the ones that you're claiming in your accelerated tech, it's not going to work.
Yeah. And that kind of
And
goes without saying. And, you know, Alicia, when I think about people all the time, we're seeing individuals who notice this knock code pop up in one of the occupation in demand lists within the province, or, you know, through, you know, really even through new programs like this, where previously they've said their work is classified as this code, and they've entered it into their profile and registered it with the government. And then, you know, within the express entry system, and then they see a new program and then they think, hey, I'm going to try to switch this and change it. And you have to be careful with that, because obviously, you know, at the end of the day, that your job description has to match the actual knock description. It needs to match a substantial number of those main duties. And if you're saying you're one thing and then you're flipping to another and another, remember, everything that you submit it's locked in with the express, like it's a part of your immigration history. And so be very, very careful saying, hey, my position is close to you know, tech, and it's not quite on this list, but hey, employer, if we shift this over a little bit, then I can qualify. The one advantage to this, Alicia, is that this can be forward looking. So ultimately, when you're going through the tech, when we go to the tech process, the job offer, you can make changes, and it's a forward looking kind of thing with the job offers as opposed to express entry. But whatever you do, make sure that, yeah, that it's aligned. Otherwise, your application it'll get refused. Simple as that.
yeah. The next thing is that within your express entry profile, there's that page where you have to indicate which provinces you're interested in residing. And if you haven't indicated Alberta on that list, then you're not going to be eligible to be nominated by AINP. So that's one thing to consider as well. So if you want to be, you know, considered for this express entry application or the accelerated tech pathway, then you got to make sure to put Alberta as your province of destination. And sometimes people say, well, I'm going to apply for all of them, or maybe they've had another express entry application that may have been selected for a different PNP. And this becomes difficult because you need to make sure that you have a valid intent to reside in whichever province you're looking to get nominated in. So we'll talk more about intention to reside further on as well.
And I'll add as well, Alicia, when you're completing your profile, do not hesitate to select every province. And that's something people don't understand, is that each province can see that you've selected them, but they don't see that you've selected everybody and you're interested in going to every province. And so there's, you know, realistically, unless you're actually going down the process, you can, you know, you can rest assured that you can select all provinces. It's not like just by selecting Alberta, somehow they're going to see that and say you have more interest. And that's one common misconception. And the previous director, that's one of the things that I talked with him, Brad Trefan, about, was how much can you guys see within the profile? And it's not as much as you guys think it is. It's the bare core. They can see if you're working. They can see if you've got a job offer in Alberta. Obviously, you know, they can see kind of a little bit of your education and things like that. But your choice to, you know, to, when you're clicking those, you know, selecting which province, we always advise clients to just select all.
Yeah. So make sure you've selected all, and because you've selected all, Alberta can then say, well, if this person qualifies and meets my criteria, then maybe we will pursue them. But they're very specific on their website. If you look into the fine print on how to apply, they give absolutely no guarantee
No,
whatsoever that they will consider your application, that they will process it. There's no first in, first out. There's
no.
no guarantees whatsoever.
And I'll give a little bit of history too on that. So years ago, they had this wonderful idea in Alberta to launch, well, two programs. One was a family stream and one was the US H-1B streams. And they were massively flooded by applications. And at the time, they didn't have a lot of caveats about, you know, submitting an application. There's no guarantee, you know, just because you've requested, you know, or you even meet all the eligibility requirements. You know, they didn't have anything that says, if we're oversubscribed, we can just choose not to process. And it got them into quite a little bit of problems because there was some alleged lawsuits threatened if they were going to cancel, all these application backlogs because they hadn't put any disclaimers on the site, that were exactly what Alicia identified here. So yeah, there are absolutely no guarantees, none whatsoever.
They also explicitly say, we may cancel this program with no
Yep.
warning at any point.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
there's that to consider too. The other thing is overall, just to situate everybody, each province only has a limited number of nominations, and that's set every year. And so, Alberta's sitting at 6,250, and, it's always is this going to be a program that's going to be heavily subscribed, or is it something where maybe there aren't that many applicants out there? So looking at this program earlier and as soon as possible is probably going to be best in case they change it or in case they meet their nomination quota.
I'm just going to pull this one in here, Alicia, from George, this question. He says, are you saying that basically Express Entry, they can review every profile you've ever submitted, even if, and then he continues, it never received an ITA? And the answer, George, is yes, they can. Because remember, when you're attesting that everything is true, complete, and correct in there, they do have the ability to look backwards. And I would say I had a client about 3 years ago, maybe it was, who had submitted multiple GC keys with multiple profiles, and they were trying to, expand their odds with multiple primary knocks so that they could get into some PNPs. And they received a fairness letter essentially from IRCC inquiring into the validity of the information that they had in their current one because it wasn't consistent with another one that they'd found. So understand, George, it is all absolutely live. So we'll just throw that one in there.
Yeah,
all right.
that's a good
Okay.
point, Mark. So
Yes.
it doesn't go away, right? The digital world is always there.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of like social media, right? Be careful what you post. And ironically, well, not ironically, that leads into a whole different topic, which is spousal sponsorships and what you're putting in your social media accounts. And if you say you're married to Fred and your social media account that you're active in shows you as being single, well, that's could be a problem. So we'll leave it at that. All right. So factors that increase your chances. And remember, this is still general Express Entry, getting those notifications of interest generally, as well as the tech stream. But what are some of these factors that increase your chances?
Yeah, and so this is from the AINP website as well. So this is public information. They're going through things that are going to increase and decrease your chances, but really they want you to have that Alberta job offer. That's one of the things that really is a big pull for the AINP. They put a lot of weight on having a valid job offer from an Alberta employer. So yeah, if you look through there, that's valid job offer and or work experience. The other thing they look at is if you are a graduate of a Canadian post-secondary institution. So if you've actually completed your studies in Canada, then that's a bonus factor in terms of whether they may consider giving you a nomination under Express Entry. And if you have somebody who is really specifically parent, child, brother or sister
Yep.
who's a permanent resident and who's residing in Alberta or a
Yep.
Canadian citizen living in Alberta.
So that doesn't include a cousin, which is my favorite term in the whole world, because I swear every single person from India has like about 5,000 cousins. And so, nope, your cousins who may or may not be blood related to you don't quite count if they're living in Alberta. So it has to be close. And why, Alicia? Why do they want it so close? Like, what
Well,
impact does that play?
yeah, I mean it does have a adaptability aspect. And so people who have a sibling or a parent living in the province are more likely to have that social support network, are more likely to stay in the province. And so Alberta wants to nominate, and every province wants to nominate people who will stay in their province, contribute their skills and education, and it won't be a lost nomination. So that's a big factor for them.
That.
And then the next thing too is French. We come back to French again. So if French is your first language, that's another thing that increases your chances at being considered for AINP Express Entry.
Yes. And when I talked with the acting director, he'd indicated that absolutely there's a reason that these are listed the way they are on this site. They don't give equal weight to these, and obviously if you have an Alberta job offer or work experience in Alberta, that is going to be one of the key factors they're looking at when they're extending notifications of interest. He did confirm back in December, that last draw in December, that Express Entry, that they did extend notifications of interest to people that were not currently living in Alberta. And so they did stretch it out, and some were overseas. So not just in Canada. So job offers and being within the right knock. He did admit as well that the data that they have in terms of what occupations are in demand in Alberta, or, that data was all in somewhat disarray. And so, trying to say, okay, well, what occupations are in demand in Alberta? It's not so easy. And in future videos, when we talk about Alberta Opportunity Stream and other things, I'll dive in a little bit deeper. But right now, just remember that's a factor and one of the pillars to the tech program. Yeah. All right, let's jump back here to our presentation.
Yeah, and then on the flip side, we're going to go through factors that decrease your chances for a general AINP Express Entry nomination. So that's also on the website. One of the things, interestingly, is if your Express Entry profile is going to expire in 5 months or less. So if you've been sitting in that pool for a long period of time, there haven't been any draws since last September, then factors that are going to decrease your chances for AINP would be an old Express Entry profile. So that's one thing to think about in terms of the timing of when you create your profiles. And the other thing is they will actually look at your primary occupation, and they're going to assess it against, is this on the list of high and low wage occupations in the province of Alberta? Is it on one of two other lists? So there's a refusal to process a labor market impact assessment list. And so this is if somebody is trying to apply for a work permit that's supported by a labor market impact assessment called an LMIA, which the employer would normally have to go and get. And there's a bunch of refusal to process occupations where employers are generally not even able to advertise and recruit and try to go down the LMIA route if the occupation that they're trying to hire for is on that list. There's a second list, though, which differs a little bit, and that's the Alberta Opportunity Stream ineligible occupations list. So keep in mind, we're talking about Alberta Express Entry, but they refer to the Alberta Opportunity Stream ineligible list again. So basically they're saying, we've got a bunch of occupations that we think we don't really need in Alberta for the foreseeable future. And if you're on one of these two lists, so either the LMIA refusal to process or the Alberta Opportunity Stream ineligible list, it's going to be a negative factor for your Express Entry AINP.
Right. And in our discussion with Minister Shandro, Minister of Employment and Immigration in Alberta, one of the things that we indicated to him in our most recent Canadian Bar Association subsection meeting for the Alberta South was that we want him to throw this list away, because at the end of the day, this list serves no purpose in my mind. And I actually made the comment to him, you'll probably remember, Alicia, I said, so either they don't believe that the process works, that the advertising and that process works, or they believe employers are liars, that they're not, that they're not actually telling the truth, that they received candidates and then they're concealing that they didn't. Now, I can tell you that there are some representatives out there that are crooked, unscrupulous, and exploitive, and they will do anything to get an approval for their employer, including telling them to disregard the 150 to 200 applications that the person received when they followed the advertising rules. And it exists out there. And because of that, we get these stupid lists. But these lists are not insignificant, and you look at this even from the standpoint, like so many times, early childhood educators, we've seen a lot of that over the years where, there's demand for this, but yet somehow it keeps sitting on the list with some exceptions. And you can see they're all categorized by our current NOC system. What? No trappers and hunters? Oh, man. All right. Well, anyways, you guys get the picture. These are a little bit more limited, but these are outright bans. And then like Alicia was indicating before, let's see if I've got the right, I'm going to just backtrack here a little bit. like we said, this high wage and low wage occupations, the do not process list. Let's see if we can pull that up. It is very, very lengthy. And let's see if it's here. Is it on the bottom? Oh, I've got to click on it here. Let's see if we can find it. There's the list. Okay. So you can see the industries, it is so broad. And this is the one that we were advocating that they needed to do away with. And as Alicia indicated, as you go through here, natural applied sciences, you can see all of that. Health occupations, you can see here this for a respiratory therapist, seriously, like the needs and with COVID. But anyways, it's on the list. And then if you continue down through here, art, culture, recreation and sport, sales and service. Yep. All of these ones. And then trades, right? Transport equipment. And this is the interesting aspect of this whole process is just the fact that, when people are qualifying through these programs and you're trying to get a work permit alone, this is a broad list that can prohibit you, and often it will prevent you from being able to go through the express entry, the process. They're not going to extend a notification of interest to you if you're on that list.
And it's a double whammy, right? You can't get a new work permit supported by an LMIA, and you also can't get your PR through the AINP if you're on the refusal to process list, or it's a negative factor. Anyways, it's going to decrease your chances. Yeah. So those are things to keep in mind. And that's kind of the overall express entry AINP, things that you kind of need to meet before you can move on to look at the subset of the accelerated tech pathways.
Right. Okay. So let's take a look at some of the requirements. Let's dive right in. And these are, we're not spending a lot of time going through what you guys can read on the website. So these are high level stuff. And then we're going to take the opportunity to share our insight with you, but you can go to the website and you can read it. So it's not rocket science, but these are some of the areas that we wanted to just remind and reiterate because they're going to trip people up.
Yeah. So now when we're saying the National Occupation Classification Code has to be on the list, what we showed you before was things that are going to decrease your chances. But for accelerated tech pathways, there is a specific list of which occupations will be the ones that they will consider. And so this is what it is. You can access it through the website. It's actually not that long. It's only, a page and a bit here. So these are the only occupations that will be considered for the accelerated tech program. And be careful, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, but when you look at the job bank in Canada, you can enter in your NOT code and you're going to get requirements for education and for requirements for occupations that are regulated occupations. And it'll tell you in which province that occupation is regulated. And be careful because some of the ones in the accelerated tech program, some of the engineering occupations and electricians, those are regulated occupations in Alberta. So not anybody can just come and set up shop and start working as an engineer. So there are additional things that you should consider depending on the requirements for your job based on your NOT code and the requirements that you can find through the job bank.
And let's just slide over and just take a peek at this. So I just pulled it up just for a straight up electrician, but it'll still serve the purpose for us. And what Alicia is talking about here is that there's always the duties, and yes, a substantial number of those main duties, you need to hit on those. But at the end here, generally for any permanent resident program, we don't care about this stuff. But in the case of trades, you can see here that there are certain provinces where trade certification is compulsory. And so obviously high school, they say, but you need to complete the program, which is usually required. But trade certification for construction electricians is compulsory in all of these provinces, including Alberta. Trade certification for electricians, domestic and rural, is compulsory in Newfoundland, Labrador, and Ontario. So you can see it breaks it down within here for these trades by province, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So this is one thing to be careful of when you're going through and making sure that you meet the requirements for your NOC. So look at the list that Alberta has for accelerated tech and make sure that your knock is on the list, and then make sure that you can show that you have done the lead statement, so that's that opening paragraph, plus at least 75% of the job duties. Because remember, we're still in the express entry world. You still have to meet those general federal requirements. And the next thing for accelerated tech is that usually they want you to be working in Alberta, but theoretically, you could also have a job offer from an Alberta employer. And this is a little bit new, and we're going to have to figure out how they're going to deal with this job offer if somebody is not actually living in the province of Alberta.
Yeah. And maybe you can elaborate just a little bit on this, Alicia. We're not going to dive in, and we will create a DIY course to help people navigate through this as well. But Alicia, just some of the technical aspects, it might not hurt just to touch on them right now with this concept, because in my discussions with Joshua Maldonado, he had indicated that the expectation was that employers could nominate someone or, support them with a job offer through the tech pilot, even if they weren't living in Canada, let alone Alberta or another province. So as we were experimenting with this and looking at it, what was the one issue that you saw, Alicia, as we were going through this process?
Yeah. So what happened was that the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program, you used to be able to submit paper applications, but they have now switched everything to an online application process. And in order to qualify and apply through that online application, everybody has to have what's called My Alberta Digital ID. And if you've been living in Alberta, you're probably familiar with this because you use it for other things as well. You can use it for accessing your health records. Before they had the vaccination documentation, you could access your vaccination records from that as well. So Alberta residents use it. But the interesting aspect of My Alberta Digital ID is that you have to have either an Alberta driver's license or an Alberta ID card issued by the province of Alberta. And that is the only way you can sign up for your My Alberta Digital ID. And the AINP has said the only way you can apply for these programs is with the same email that you used for My Alberta Digital ID, and you have to use My Alberta Digital ID. So it's unclear to me exactly how it would work if somebody is not living in Canada, it has not resided in Alberta, and is getting a job offer from a different province or maybe even a different country.
And yeah, and this is absolutely something that we need to bring up with, because, with the department, because often when they launch these things, they don't think about, these, some of these outliers, I guess.
Yeah.
All right.
So the next thing is that in addition to having your knock on the list for accelerated tech, your Alberta employer also has to self-identify as falling within certain NAICS codes as an employer. And this is new. So you can also go back to the AINP website, and it's going to say which NAICS codes they will accept for employers. And so you can go to the NAICS website as well and then drill down, because each of these, they only give you the first digits, but there's subsets of each of these NAICS codes that provide a little bit more detail, not a ton of detail. So it will be interesting to see how they apply this, or whether they say some employers aren't eligible based on the classification structure. It seems like they just have to self-identify as being in the tech industry within one of these NAICS codes.
Yeah. And when also in that meeting that I had with the acting director, he'd emphasized that they were going to try to be generous. Their goal was not to restrict, people from applying. And even when you look at the actual knock codes themselves, when you think of tech, what do you think of, Alicia? Like, I think of software developers, right? I think of people that are, that are programmers. But if you look at the list, yes, they're on the list. You've got computer information systems managers and that suite of individuals, including your software engineers and database and info systems folks. But if you keep going down here, you can see here, in addition to that, they do have like medical lab technologists. They have producers, directors, choreographers. Like this is graphic designers and illustrators. And then, like we said, electricians are on the list. and industrial electricians on the list. So in some cases, their desire is to capture things in a fairly broad fashion, and they are going to give employers the benefit of the doubt. But notwithstanding that, you still have to be careful, because if you've got a fast food franchise and you're saying that, hey, I want to support the person running my websites or whatever, that may not cut it if you can't
Yeah.
show that your employment is your business is actually within these programs. And one other thing that I'll point out as well is I asked them, okay, so are you going to use the the business registration system in Alberta, the core system, and see what they've declared on their articles of incorporation as their main business? And they said no, they're not going to go into that level of assessing it, but they're definitely going to give it a smell test, and if it doesn't smell right, they're going to ask questions. So
Yeah.
a
Because
few
if you
extra
flip back,
things.
Mark, to
Mhm.
that NAICS code
Oh, the code page,
classification, yeah,
this one.
this is yeah. So this is what they're saying employers need to fall under,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Yes.
these are the categories that make sure that your employer, so yes, you have to have that knock, and your employer has to be within this employment area.
Yeah. And so even if you are within one of the knock codes here, if your employer isn't,
Hmm.
it won't fly.
Right. Yeah. And this is different than some other programs because
Mhm.
there are specific employer requirements for industry rather than, like in Ontario, for example, you have the employer has to be of a certain size or have a certain
Yeah.
number of employees and have a certain amount of revenue. But this is different. This is industry based.
Yeah.
So.
Exactly.
Um, and then going back to the point we made earlier, and I won't dwell on it
Mhm.
too long, but your primary occupation has to match what you
Has to
put as your
match.
primary occupation in your
Yeah.
Express Entry profile. So be really careful if you have an existing profile that you've created beforehand and you're now trying to change it in order to fit within the accelerated tech requirements.
And we're not saying that you can't. If you now are in a position where your job has changed or something has happened and now you're working in a different knock code, we're not saying that you can't make that change, but you need to be able to explain it and defend it. And if you are, and we see it a lot with the 2173s and the 75s, and on the tech side flipping back and forth, and they are distinct knock codes. And interestingly, Alicia, tech is a new growing industry within Alberta. And a lot of new startups and new operations that have few employees means that you are going to be doing a lot of different things for that company. And it becomes more difficult to really confine yourselves into one knock, like it is if you're working for a big, large tech company. And so keep that in mind as you're battling through this. And obviously, we're here to help people. I think one of the things we do more often than anything else within the context of Express Entry or, even the PNPs is just reviewing those knock codes. And we've got a couple tools that we give to our clients and those who subscribe to the Express Entry course, DIY course that we have available for individuals. So, all right. Okay, so tips and strategies. We've already been infusing this whole presentation with tips and strategies, but realistically, we've got a couple that we've hit on, which we've already talked about, but we want to reiterate them over and over again. Proving your knock, Alicia. What are we getting at there?
Yeah. I mean, you have to back it up, right? So the AINP does and will follow up with your employers. And so you have to have valid letters of employment. You've got to have your employment contracts. If you don't have an employment contract, then make sure that that letter from your employer is absolutely comprehensive. So you're going to want to have all of the details, your job date starting, hours of work, job duties, very specifically listed, and meeting all the requirements too in terms of official letterhead signed by a direct manager, making sure that you've got their contact information, the company's contact information, and the hours of work. So this is the other thing is you've got to prove at least 30 hours per week for a continuous 12-month period or 52 weeks. There can't be big breaks in that period of employment. And if they want to have a job offer going forward, then there's going to be some other requirements too about the wage. And we'll get into that a little bit in the next few slides.
Now, it's interesting when I look at this, employer must qualify. I'll pull up this question from Aslam, and we see this quite a bit. He says, I'm a postgrad holder working for a Nova Scotia employer from Alberta. And with the pandemic, we have so many people that are working virtually in different locations where the pandemic has now afforded them the opportunity of living wherever they want. And, but yet the employer is based not in Alberta. And he says, I'm paying Nova Scotia tax. I've got my salary slips. In my EE profile, the employer address is Halifax. Will I be considered for a nomination via the PNP? And then he follows up with a sibling is a PR holder in Alberta. And so this really comes down to the fact that the employer must qualify. And in the case of Aslam, well, what's the response, Alicia?
No, if it's not an Alberta-based employer, then
Yeah.
you can't qualify for accelerated tech. You might still be able to qualify for Alberta Express Entry in general, maybe, depending if you've got enough points and if you've got, you can prove your sibling and you can have an intention to reside and they happen to pick you. But if you don't have an employer from Alberta, you won't qualify for the accelerated tech.
Yeah. And Nutty Raspberry here. Oh man, I love that name. She says, well, what if I don't have relatives in Alberta? Do I still have a chance to be invited? And the answer is, well, yes, whether it's the tech or otherwise. It's not a prerequisite. Think of it like one little extra bonus to help distinguish you or separate you from maybe another candidate with the same human capital or background that you have. So these are all, little advantages, like we said, that can increase your chance, but in and of themselves, it's not a deal breaker. And even within the Express Entry stream, like I said, if you don't have a job offer, they back in December did extend some notifications of interest to people that weren't in Canada that didn't have job offers. So, so keep that in mind. All right.
So the next, and sorry, that just one thing to pay attention to is there is an accelerated tech online form, and it's only about 6 screens long. It's not complicated, but you do have to also submit that form. So if you have an Express Entry profile, if you fit within one of the NOT codes that's on accelerated tech, you've got an employer in Alberta who's on that NAICS list, and you actually want to apply for Alberta Accelerated Tech, then you have to submit the online form. And there's a certification at the end where you have to swear that everything that you are submitting is accurate, true, complete, and correct. So pay attention to that little form. And the other thing, of course, is that you have to meet the employment requirements.
And it's just embedded right in here. And like I said, when you guys read it, you'll be able to follow through. But you have to kind of don't listen or don't pay too much attention to the headings. You have to dig down. It's obviously instead of revamping new pages, they've just added text in the links into the existing factors. But you have to scroll down a ways until you can finally get to the spot where accelerated tech doesn't have its own heading, and then you can actually log in and start the process like Alicia said here.
Yeah. And for this one, you don't have to log in yet. So this Accelerated Tech Pathway form, you just complete the 6 screens and then you have to certify and submit.
Yeah. So this initial part here saying, hey, I'm interested, this part doesn't require that. But when you're activating and you're going through the process of submitting the more fulsome application, that's where the IDs start to cause some problems.
Well, and be careful too, because here you have to indicate your email address, and that email address better correspond with your email address for your Express Entry profile federally, and it better be the same as the one that you have for your My Digital Alberta ID. So
yeah. And we've had a client, and Chanel actually worked for quite a while, and we had to reach out to the province, but she had a heck of a time responding to her notification of interest because there was there was some type of a corruption within the process, an email that had been used for something else, and the system wasn't recognizing her, and it took quite a while for us to get that resolved. And when I say quite a while, well past the time period to respond. And
2 weeks.
But fortunately,
you only have 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks, right? And so fortunately for her, we were able to reach out to the AINP and say, hey, we got this problem. This client doesn't want to lose their opportunity to go through and immigrate to Alberta through the AINP. So, All right.
So
Okay,
those are the
let's.
tips and strategies. Yeah.
Mhm. I wonder if there's anything like in terms of proof of full-time employment. I know we've talked about this a little bit, and sometimes one of the big questions we get for people outside of Canada is, well, what if I don't have pay slips? Or better yet, what if I was paid in cash? Well, I can tell you in Canada, it's going to be pretty rare that an employer is paying you in cash, given our current world. And when it comes for employers who have to keep accurate records of everything, if you are working for an employer that is saying, hey, I just want to pay you cash, you should have some serious reservations about that. In fact, they have an obligation to remit your taxes to the government on your behalf at source before they pay you your net paycheck. And if they're paying you with cash, that becomes challenging to do. And so please be aware of that, because they're going to expect these things to be present. Pay slips and pay stubs are very, very common. Most employers do that. That's, that pay slip and the wage that you're earning, it's pretty easy for them to determine whether or not you're hitting that 30 hours a week to reach the full-time level.
Yeah. And they do have the document checklist for the Alberta Express Entry streams as well, and they're very specific on the employment reference letters too.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
they want all those details, all the employer contact information and hours of work and main duties and education required, which is a little bit different than the general, federal Express Entry too. So be careful in those letters.
Yeah.
All right, so reasons that you may not qualify specifically for the accelerated tech: you cannot be a refugee claimant, you cannot have an appeal in process, and you cannot be under removal proceedings or in the removal stages at all. So once you've gone down a road of removal or inadmissibility or a failed refugee claim, or even a legitimate refugee claim maybe in process and hasn't even started being assessed yet, any of those things is going to make you ineligible for a nomination. The other thing is sometimes, and I've had this before with a client, it was a very interesting situation where they actually had an AOS indication of interest and an express entry indication of interest, and we really had to weigh things and try to figure out which one to drop. And then they ended up going with the express entry AINP. But you can't have an active nomination under another AINP stream. They make you choose. You have to only go with one of them.
Yes.
The other thing is that just like federally, misrepresentation is a big deal. This is super serious stuff. Section 40 of the Immigration Refugee Protection Act, there is a 5-year bar, and it also applies to Alberta. So if you have ever misrepresented to the Alberta government in the past on an immigration application, they have those records. They know that you are barred for 5 years and you are not eligible to be nominated.
Yep.
The next thing is that this is too different than the federal express entry, because now immigration in Alberta is actually, or AINP is actually looking at your wage. And so you can go to that AINP page and look at which wages they will accept, but you've got to prove that your wages are not too low. You also have to be a full-time employee, not a part-time employee. You cannot be a contractor, and you can't be working online from outside Alberta.
And one thing I want to point out too, lots of times people, when you're working on a postgrad work permit in Canada, very rarely are you paid what we recognize as the prevailing wage rate for basically the purposes of, say, if you're applying for an LMIA. And the prevailing wage rate is often that kind of median wage, that middle range, not the entry level wage. And you can go, and I'll just flip over here to the website. You can go to the job bank, and they're constantly updating this. Career planning, job search, trend analysis. You can go and choose wages here, and you can take a peek at your particular occupation. So we're kind of on the electrician here. That's on the list. So let's just take a peek here. And this is how you can kind of get an idea if you're in the right range. And so the hourly wages are by community area. And you can see they've got a low, a median, and a high. So we can skip through all the provinces and let's jump down to Alberta, and then you can see. So realistically, if you're applying for a labor market impact assessment, you've got to hit this middle range of 36. So apparently there aren't electricians enough down here in Lethbridge where I live to have data. And if you do have an NA here, then you're going to default in most cases back to this level. But for the other areas, like Alicia's up in Calgary, this right here is the low end. So this 24 here, for the purposes of the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program, would be the floor. And in many cases, they ask questions, but if you're getting paid less than $24 an hour, that can cause you a problem. If it was an LMIA application, it would be done. You would have no chance because you'd have to be receiving $36. And so if you're an employer in Alberta, that's the threshold that you have to look at for the purposes of the AINP, when it comes to how much you're paying the individuals.
Well, and two, it is interesting because they actually use the lowest starting wage for your occupation across all industries in Alberta, and then they reference you to the ALIS website. So they're
Alice.
also looking at that.
Yeah.
So, cross-reference a few things, but maybe it's an opportunity to convince your employer to give you a little bit of a pay bump if you were slightly below where you need to be here. If you do have an LMIA, of course, it has to be at that median wage rate that Mark was showing you first.
You bet.
So,
And I'm going to shift back here and just show you what Alicia is referring to. So this one right here is the wage and salary survey, the methodology. This is where you can search for those same positions. And so, so if we go into here and just pull up our electrician again, let's see, electrician. Okay. So you can see here, then they had that you can pull up the wages and you can check it out here. So same thing, this data, cross-reference, take a look at all of them. And in this case here, you can see the average wage is $36.74. So if we compare that to the wage here, the average wage was 36. So it's pretty close. But yeah, you want to definitely make sure that you're in that range. And then you can see the low here. So, so that's kind of the data that they rely upon, kind of a combo.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so make sure to cross-reference both because it's a little bit different than the federal requirements. And so you'll want to make sure that you're also looking at the ALIS information.
All right.
So those are the things that could disqualify you, how the process works, and there is more information on the Alberta Immigrant Nominee website as well, but make sure you meet all those eligibility criteria. Make sure you have CEC eligibility, federal skilled worker, or federal skilled trade, depending on what your occupation has been. You've got to have that valid express entry profile. It has to be, you've got to have your application in the pool, right? It can't be you haven't created it yet, because when you do that accelerated tech form, you have to actually give them your profile number and your not code.
Yeah.
So make sure that when you submit that pathway form, you've got all your accurate information, the websites match, and then you're going to wait to see if you get nominated.
And this is something I also want to point out. So Andy says, does the employer need an LMIA for the job offer? So this is good news. What's the answer?
No, you don't have to have an LMIA for the job offer. There's nothing saying you have to have the LMIA. If you're already working in Alberta, you need to have valid status. So you either need to have an exception to the LMIA, so you have an LMIA exempt work permit, maybe a postgrad work permit for most people, or you have an employer who's gone through that LMIA process and is then extending you a job offer.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Keep going, Alicia. I kind of cut you off midstream here.
Yeah, no worries. So you're waiting to see if you're nominated. Again, no guarantees. So AINP doesn't say that they will nominate anybody at all, that they'll keep this program open for any period of time at all. We hope that they will for at least a reasonable period of time, especially if it's going well. But the next thing is, you still have to maintain your status. If you're in Canada, you've got to check the validity date on your work permit or your study permit or whatever visitor record you have. Because if your status is going to expire, you're going to need to figure out what your options are to extend it or to switch to a different category. It is interesting, and hopefully they will be doing this. We're not sure exactly the mechanics or how or when, but if you are not currently working in Alberta and you have a job offer from a valid Alberta employer, Hopefully, the province of Alberta will actually be issuing these Regulation 204 Sub C work permit support letters. And this would be for an employer
Yeah.
specific work permit if they're going to nominate you. And we're not exactly sure how this will play out in real time, but hopefully it'll be an option.
Yeah. And I think if you look at what they've done in the past, I suspect that the letter will come almost automatically with the nomination in many respects. And then once you receive that 204C letter, it will, with the nomination, you can then take that and use that to apply for your work permit, like Alicia said. So we suspect that's probably, how it's going to work. Now, are they going to issue it with every nomination, or are they just going to look at the expiry date on your work permit and issue it for people that have work permits expiring in 6 months or something? We're just not sure. But this 204C letter really is a positive component to this, because hey, if they're saying this individual has a job offer waiting for them, why in the world would they not want them to be able to come here, work as quickly as possible while they're waiting for this, the PR process to run its course? And we're seeing processing times for express entry to still, in many cases, be at over 9 months. So it's even through express entry, it's not really lightning fast right now. I'm going to pull this question up from Hardy. He says, according to the AINP processing times inventory, some knocks like civil engineering no longer take longer to process. Is there a specific reason besides just high volume of applications? And maybe I can touch on this one. For years and years, Alberta has tried to be fair to all industries, and they have held out that where they get high volumes, they don't want certain industries to take the lion's share of the 6,250 nominations or whatever they have. They're waiting once the levels plans, and we should be getting those any day now, the federal levels plans, but they want to try to distribute it evenly. And so when there's a large volume in one particular industry, yes, they slow them down because they want to make sure that the distribution is fairly broad to be fair to all industries. Because, food service supervisors through the old AOS stream, like they could dominate everything. And so that's part of the reason why they've done that, Hardy.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing is, keep in mind, civil engineering is a regulated trade in Alberta, and so make sure that you don't have to have your trade certification or your actual PEng in order to be able to work as an engineer in Alberta, but you would have to be going through that EIT process, that engineering training process. So be careful about that. And this kind of leads us into what to prepare now, because the last point is be careful of those regulated occupations. Make sure that you can prove either you are qualified or you have the ability to be qualified by the trade or certification organization that applies to you. So yeah. What to prepare now? What do you need to do? What do you need to gather? This always is important because these things take time. And let's say you've got your profile in there and all of a sudden it's 2 weeks and they give you a notification and you've got to get everything submitted. So make sure you have those language test results. They have to be valid, IELTS or CELPIP or one of the TCF or TEF if you're speaking French. The education credential assessment has to be valid. You've got to have the numbers for that. AINP usually also wants the transcripts, and generally it's a good practice to have those transcripts federally also, but AINP wants them. Employer letters, be very detailed and specific. Go take a look at that document checklist in detail. Proof of funds, depending on which category you've applied under. So federal skilled worker, you need to make sure that you have that proof of funds. Police certificates, these ones are big because you may have been traveling, maybe, or maybe those police certificates require a few looks at them to make sure that they are absolutely perfect. If there's anything, we had another YouTube video where we talked about, I heard a horror story about somebody who'd been traveling and then their address that they listed on their express entry profile was back for their home address in Europe, and immigration said they're canceling their express entry application because the police certificate from Europe wasn't new. It wasn't within 6 months, even though the person had in their travel history that they had been traveling in the US. So be really careful about those police certificates. When in doubt, make sure to get a new one. And then the medical exams, taking a look at how long it's taking to get into a designated practitioner near you.
Yeah, and that's a reality. And if there's no delays and you can get in fast, then no worries. But those of you who were following what happened with the temporary resident to permanent resident pathway last year, those who had those documents in place, and we're giving you advice not just for the tech program, but for all programs, it's critical that you have all of this stuff ready to go, that your language tests aren't expiring, that you've got your ECAs, that you've got your transcripts. And sometimes schools drag their feet in giving those to you. And when it comes to police certificates and medicals, yes, you want those to be updated. And the medicals are a question, right? Because with Express Entry, they're now not requiring them up front, but I still advise my clients to get them. And as long as, if the $200 or $300 or whatever it costs you to get the medical, as long as that's not prohibitive for you, then I always advise my clients, if they can, to get those upfront medicals and have them ready to go, because it'll just save time. And it will cut down in the back and forth ultimately with finalizing your application.
Yeah. Yep, so be really careful on that knock selection. Take a look, figure out what you had in your Express Entry profile so far. Make sure that your knock is on the Accelerated Tech Pathway if that's the program that you're targeting.
Mhm.
And then this is something that sometimes trips people up also is full-time is considered 30 hours a week. In some countries it's more than that, but for the purposes of Express Entry, it's a minimum of 30 hours per week, and it's got to be at least 52 weeks. So AINP says it's got to be at least for 1 year. And they do actually say that it needs to be continuous if you're getting a job offer. So there can't be breaks in that employment offer. The work location has to be in Alberta, and make sure that that salary is going to conform with what the LMIA says or with the ALIS information
Yeah.
for Alberta.
And essentially, if your position is seasonal, it isn't going to work.
No. And then the next thing is make sure that you have valid status in Canada. If you are here, you have to extend your temporary residence or your work permit. And this is one that often people forget. They just forget to look at their passport validity. And so if your work permit is going to expire, your work permit or your other status document in Canada is always tied to your passport validity. So sometimes postgraduate work permit holders will only be issued, let's say they were eligible for 3 years on their postgrad. If their passport's expiring at year 2, they're only going to get 2 years. So sometimes you can recapture time, extend that passport, do an application to recapture time, but make sure that you're looking at your passport validity in conjunction with all of that. And then this one is a harder to define one, but you've got to prove your intention to live and work in Alberta. And depending on the circumstances, you may be able to make a better argument for this. Where have you studied? If you've studied in Alberta, that's a great factor. If you have direct family members, so remember siblings, parent, child in Canada, or if you have prior work history in Alberta specifically.
And I'll advise everyone to be careful just searching, doing a Google search for a good statement of intent or things like that for Alberta, and then basically copying some generic, you know, document that someone has written for their application, that everybody else is mirroring it. It needs to be you. It needs to be specific. You need to be genuine and what you're putting in there, and don't be lazy. Take the effort, that proof of intention. If I like to always include a statement in there to explain, why Alberta is the right place, why it fits for my occupation, why, I've been, looking at jobs, and it's really going to be a great place where I want to live and, as applicable, raise my family forever. Essentially, that's what they want to hear. And if your intentions are along that and you can prove it, that's going to be a big plus.
Yeah. The other thing is sometimes what happens is I hear from people who say, well, all my family lives in Ontario, but I'm going to file this application to the AINP and I'm going to prove to
Yeah.
them that I have an intent to live in Alberta. It's harder. You now have an uphill battle if you have your close family members who live in a different Canadian province. So just be careful of that.
Yep. Exactly.
All right. And then we touched upon regulated occupations. The way that you can check also when you've gone and figured out that it is a regulated occupation is you're going to go look at Alberta Industry and Trade, and you're going to work through what the requirements are if you do have a job that's in a regulated occupation.
All right. Okay. Well, we have come to the end of this, and we're definitely going to have some follow-ups on this. This program was launched in January, not long ago, and there are definitely some significant gaps in what the province is going, how they're going to treat these applications. And, but I guess one thing I do want to do is just, summarize just a little bit some of the thoughts that I had after speaking with Joshua Maldonado. We're not sure how it's going to play out, but here's two things that came to mind. The first one is that if you're an employer in Alberta and you're looking to bring people in and attract them away from British Columbia or Ontario, and you're within the tech, the tech world, and you think your premise, your business falls within those industries, this is a wonderful, wonderful way to get amazing workers. And there are so many postgrad work permit holders across the country that are working in tech, BC and Ontario, that have the ability to slide right over to you with a job offer, and then you basically can start employing them right away, and you can offer them a pathway to permanent residence that may not exist right now in those other provinces. So it's a huge, huge bonus for Alberta employers in the tech industry. And so take that into consideration. And in like manner, that same opportunity goes to all of you postgrad work permit holders all over the country who really like your job, you like the work that you're doing, but you don't have a pathway to permanent residence. There haven't been draws for express entry, and you're in a position where you're wondering, even if there is one, the scores are going to be so high, I won't qualify before my postgrad work permit expires. So job offer, employer in Alberta that falls within the tech industry, and you line up with it, there is your ticket. And when that nomination comes through from Alberta, the R204C letter comes, which allows you to extend your permit. And so those are two big wins that I see, Alicia. I don't know if you have any kind of closing or final thoughts before we jump to a few last minute questions. And those of you who have been patient and do have questions, you can post a few now, and we will, and then we'll get to those in just a little bit if you have others that haven't been covered yet. So any closing thoughts, Alicia?
I think just the closing thoughts are just be even more detailed when you're preparing your application, because not only do you have to meet all the general federal express entry requirements and the document requirements, but now you have kind of an added layer of document preparation and more things that you have to triple check to make sure that you're meeting all the eligibility parameters. So look at both of those programs in conjunction.
Yeah. Okay. This is one and I think I already answered this one for you, Rocky. Rocky says, I'm in PE. I'm currently in PEI. Hey, Deanna, my wife and I, we're headed to PEI. Did I tell you that, Alicia, that I was going to take her we're going to go to Charlottetown in July? I'm not sure if I told you that.
Nice.
Yeah, we're going to go visit Anne of Green Gables and see her house. And my wife loves that. So yes, currently in PEI, work permit expiring in August. So common, Rocky. So many people are in that category and not enough CRS points. Well, the reality is you don't know right now where the points are going to shake down, but it's a reality that, what are your options? Well, one of the things that we've talked about at length, and this kind of delves outside of the realm of this particular program, but go to our website, and Alicia has written a very, very comprehensive blog post on this topic, and it's pretty easy to find. So if we share the website here, so holthelaw.com is our website. You can see up here, February 15th, that is Tuesday of next week after Remembrance Day, Express Entry course and Masterclass will launch. So definitely head over there.
Valentine's Day, Mark. Valentine's Day,
is.
not Remembrance Day.
Oh, sorry, Valentine's Day. Boy, I've got my brain is all mushed up today. Yes, Valentine's Day, not Remembrance Day. So Valentine's Day is the 14th, so that starts on the 15th. But in our resources section right here, if you go to blog, you will see a very comprehensive blog post. It says, how long can I stay in Canada after my work permit expires? Well, this actually goes well beyond that. It covers your situation, what options are available. So go check that out. Alicia wrote that, and we've also done a number of videos on these topics on the YouTube channel. Some of you are watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, all over. So take that into consideration as well. All right. Yeah, and here Bright and yes, Bright, you and I we talked about this, my friend. He says it's tough to qualify for this program, owing to oh boy, we've got visitors coming here. All right, let's see. My wife has decided to come home, so little Simba. All right, buddy, there you go. Even live streams don't stop for Simba when mommy comes home, and so there we go. But yeah, Bright, we talked about this, and for sure, he says flexibility in the programs or eligibility for some of us international grads. Understand, Bright, the minister is mindful of you. And like I've discussed in those previous YouTube videos and discussions with him, like I think there's going to be some things that are going to be happening. And I think they're just waiting for the levels plans to kind of drop. And then, once those are released, I'll make sure to share it right away. And we'll definitely fill you in on any new options that help to save you guys. All right. And then Kadia says, oh, Mark, you're a godsend. Glad the day I came across your channel. I'm located in New Brunswick. It's wonderful to see you guys connecting from all across the country. It's really, really wonderful. We love to see people and where they're tuning in from and just trying to be of support and helping you in your journey. Okay, let's see what else we have here. And we're going to try to isolate these to the tech as much as possible. Yeah, and this is another frustration. I can see the frustration in the iconic here. There are 26 forms of PR applications. Daily, I open it on the laptop and close it. So basically, yes, people are waiting for opportunities to come. All right, let's see what else we have here. Andy, I think, is making a comment here. You cannot choose Quebec in EE or your ITA will be canceled. You can just confirm that one, Alicia.
Yeah, I mean, you're not eligible for the AINP, of course, if you've chosen Quebec. You can't be resident in Quebec. You would have to be showing that you're going to be residing in a province other than Quebec for Express Entry.
Yep. And then we've answered this one from Neutral here. Would one need to obtain an LMIA for a job offer suitable for this program? No. And that's one of the advantages to this program is that you don't. Let's see here what we have. Who's up next? Okay, so Bright's got a more lengthy question. With the Alberta Express Entry, I live in Calgary, had my master's degree in Calgary, and have an EE profile with a score of 508, hoping to get an Alberta Expression of Interest, but never did. 5 months to expire of my EE. And yeah, Bright, it's hard to know what's causing them to pull people. With the general expressions of interest, other than those factors that we've talked about, is the work that you're doing, do you have a job offer in Alberta? That's one thing. Yes, study is good. Where are you working? Are you working outside of the province for an employer outside? And that could be a factor that we see with people, especially with the remote world and tech and everything like that. Okay. Okay, here's the tricky one, which I know people are asking, and I guess it kind of falls suit with our topic here. Bright says, if I have an Express Entry profile that expires in 5 months, would your advice, be to withdraw and re-enter the pool to meet the Alberta Express Entry stream? And many people, for a long time, we got feedback from the OINP that once, if your profile was in and you were passed over, that it was like a little bit of a switch that then the next time they went through, they were looking for fresh applicants. And so people would cancel, withdraw, and put a new profile in. And they actually did trigger that. But for the purposes of the Alberta process, Bright, that's something I can't answer. I don't know if you have any intel on that. But ultimately, you can cancel your profile at any time and start a new one as long as you don't have multiple ones going the same time. So it's a little bit more work.
The other potential downside of that is, let's say you've got your Express Entry profile in the federal or CEC pool, and let's say it's been there, you've had it there for a long time if it's going to expire in 5 months, and let's say they do a draw in the summer, and that CRS that you have, I forget what you said, five something, but let's say they pulled that and your profile has been in there longer, and there's a cutoff. If there's a tie-breaking rule, you might get a federal CEC draw, but if you pull your profile and then resubmit it, then you might lose out on a federal CEC draw. So this is really tricky to be too cute in terms of messing around with what you pull and what you don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Bob's got this question. He says, I'm a lawyer for 2 years now, Bachelor of Law 5 years ago, worked as a plumber for 6 years before being a lawyer. Should I put my primary work as a plumber? Is it better in EE? Thanks a lot, Mr. Mark. Proud of you. Well, thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. And he said worked as an electrician 2 years before working in plumbing too. So thanks again. So this is interesting. This is once again strategizing, right? And it's really hard to know. You have the flexibility to choose whatever knock you want as your primary knock, right? You can have it as long as it's within the last 10 years. You can choose whatever knock you want to have, but
Ex
yeah.
ex yeah, except for federal skilled trades, keep in mind you have to
Mhm.
prove that you've done one of the federal skilled trades, so it depends on what your knock code starts with. But if you were working as an electrician, you're under 7.2, and you've got to prove 2 years within the last 5 years of work as an electrician to qualify for federal skilled trades. So just be careful about how long you can go back in your work history.
Yeah. Anastasia says, if I'm nominated by the province through this pathway, tied to a specific employer and got PR, how long will I have to work for that employer? When will I be able to quit or switch employers? That's not the question you want to be asking, but okay. What's your thoughts on that, Alicia?
Um, so yeah, if they do give you that R204C letter, then this is a closed work permit. So you have an employer specific who's indicated on there. Um, Once you get your PR and you've landed and you're now a permanent resident, you don't have to have a work permit anymore, and you don't have to work for any particular employer. Once you're a confirmed permanent resident of Canada, you can work for any employer you want to. But keep in mind that if you were nominated by a province, you need to prove that you are doing everything within your power to maintain employment and live in the province of whatever province nominated you. So,
Yeah. And then we take Hardy here. He says, if cryptocurrency or working in a crypto business could work as either a proof of funds or a knock in tech. I can tell you that proof of funds, highly unlikely that you can establish that using cryptocurrency, maybe one day. And as far as a knock in tech, it depends on what your duties are. So it depends entirely on that. Um,
you also can't get paid in alternative wage schemes. You actually
yeah.
have to get paid a salary. So that's what they say on the AINP.
Yeah. This is a great comment from George, who's a longtime follower and an alumnus of the Canadian Immigration Institute. George says this program is great. There won't be employers selling it for $30,000 like fast food restaurants are doing. I know, George, it's awful. And I wish that I could just go hunt down every single fast food restaurant that was doing that and put them all out of business, revoke their license, and just completely take them out. But the reality is people that are actually paying are contributing to it. So you might have an employer says, hey, I'll support your PR if you give me $30,000. And then that person tells their family, who then gets loans and mortgages their houses and their lives, all for this precarious illegal scheme. Well, them paying the money is just as bad in my terms as the employer who's accepting it. They're both at fault here, even though there's so much pressure. So yeah, good point. Ralph, shout out to you. Good to see you, my friend. Okay. Let's see what else we have here. So Rezada says, saw your last video from a few hours back. Hope Almighty grants you the patience and fortitude. I was hesitant to say it in this video, but I thought it's better to say than not say. Thank you. I had a close friend die, Alicia. I was just
Oh,
told last night. Yeah. And he's struggled with MS for years, and he's been bedridden for probably 15 years. So you can imagine, like, so long. He was able to get out sometimes, but yeah, I'd always go visit him, and I was supposed to go visit him just the last couple of weeks, and so I have a little bit of regret right now. No problem, Rezada. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Okay, my spouse and I both have an English assessment test for the AINP.
well, this is going to depend on if your spouse is, accompanying you and on the
Yeah.
application, because if you're having an accompanying spouse as part of your Express Entry profile, then if you need those points, they will have to have the language assessment. If you have fantastic points and you don't need your spouse's language assessment and you can carry on without the spouse, then maybe you
Yeah.
don't. But if you're relying on that federally, then yeah, you're
Yeah.
going to need it as well.
Exactly. If you can get through without it, it's not mandatory as long as you don't need the points. And the province doesn't ask for language test results from dependents, spouses. It's the primary applicant. Okay. Okay. Thank you. I'm not sure about that one.
Because of your
Okay.
trip in the summer.
Oh, yes,
They're
yes. Oh,
welcoming you to
that's right.
PEI.
Oh, that's right. Okay, come on. Okay, say hi instead of running by. He thought Deanna was coming. He thought my wife was coming, but apparently not. So he sees the car out and they haven't yet come into the house. And so now he's, oh, if I showed you, he's looking out the window. I think everybody's probably got someone, a furry friend that is close to them. Okay, Han says, hey, Mark, does your Express Entry course cover doing a letter for dual intent? My wife is trying to secure a spot in her school. When we secure an LOA, we would definitely try to go for a consult. Well, Han's Express Entry doesn't, it wouldn't really, this is a whole different thing, Hans. Like obviously book a consult, we can sort all of that out for you. There's no problems at all. And I think we've already talked a little bit about how, it's really easy to slide over and book a consult. All you have to do is click on this little link on the main page here. This is always here, speak to a lawyer. And then you can literally just click and choose Alicia or Chanel or Susan or myself. I'm the worst choice. So that's why I've got all the other lawyers ahead of me here. So that is what we recommend that you do. Okay. We're just about through the bottom here. Let's see. Hardy says, you're very welcome. Thanks for your time. Okay. And then we'll get Max here. So Max says, how does location under conditions on the work permit? Sorry, guys. Welcome.
So, Max, this is an interesting question because if you have a work permit, then depending on where you've come through, the border entries kind of have different processes, whether you've come in through a land border or through an airport, and they're normally going to be putting the employment location on there. And it's going to say not authorized to work in any other location. So sometimes it'll say very specifically, you're authorized to work in Calgary or Lethbridge or something else. But sometimes it'll say that they're authorized to work in a city, and then under conditions, it will have something like authorized to work at client sites across Alberta or authorized to work at client sites across Canada. So maybe there will be something in your work permit that specifies that, but your employer or your lawyer that's been helping you do your application must have requested that specifically. So sometimes people are rushed and they're panicked when they're going through the border and they forget to look at what was actually entered and issued on their document. And sometimes the officers miss it too, right? They'll only have that one city rather than putting the notation that you're authorized to work across sites in Alberta. So if there are more than one employment location, you're going to want to have that listed on your work permit. Otherwise, you're going to want to go back to the work permit application if it was an online application that you submitted and show where that evidence was that was supported by your employer to say, look, I've got multiple locations. If you did an LMIA exempt through the employer portal, for example, you have a primary occupation location and a secondary. And so if there were multiple locations listed on there, you might actually have to go and change the conditions on your work permit, do an application to change conditions on your work permit before you can prove that you're authorized to work in Alberta. So just be really careful on that. Oh, Mark, I can't hear you.
There we go. The reason you can't hear me because my lovely Simba stepped on my mute button on my audio system here. Now you can hear me. Great. Okay.
Yeah.
So Taj says, is the AINP good for someone who's coming over here on an IEC and the primary knock code is in tech?
Yeah, it for sure
Absolutely.
could be. Yeah.
Yeah.
So IEC is your International Experience Canada, right? So a lot of those, depending on which your country of origin is, you're working holiday applications or sometimes young professional, depending on which categories are available to you. Those are generally open work permits. Some of them might be, if you're doing a co-op term, young professional, some of those are actually tied to an employer. But yeah, if you have valid authorization to work, that's eligible.
Yeah. And Max says, thanks. You're very welcome. And then we've got Yildiz asked the question. I don't know. I don't think I can answer. So how much does it cost for my self-employed company papers? Not quite sure where you're going with that one. I don't know. Okay. All right. Well, Alicia, we've come to the end. We've spent a lot of time talking about all of this. And I know people are probably wondering, all right, well, thanks for the presentation. Where do we go from here? Feel free to send us an email or book a consultation on the website where we had, where we directed you to. So definitely check that out. Oh, looks like Shane has got a question that he slid in here. Let's see if we can get Shane in here. Okay. So he says, an Alberta company employs workers online in Ontario. Okay. The spouse is a full-time student with the intent to live in Alberta after grad. I believe working online is a disqualifier. Can you overcome with evidence of intent to go to Alberta post-grad? Alberta has been very rigid with this. Very, very unlikely, Shane, that they would, that they would go with an intent. I guess ultimately, if the, where's the employer based? Like, so the company employs the worker online in Ontario. Is the employer in Alberta? And I guess you could always make the pitch, because theoretically, if the employer is in Alberta, you could make the pitch that, that they are going to be coming back and the job offer is for them to, be in Alberta. But because it's no different than an offer for someone else who was already outside working for another company. But yeah, you gotta, okay, there we go. Shane says it's Calgary. Yeah, you can make the pitch. I don't think there's any problems with making that pitch. That's
for the job offer, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you could definitely do that. So, all right. Did you have anything else, Alicia? Looks like we got another question popped up here.
I was just going to add too that there is a fee for the AINP. So if you are applying to the AINP and they do send you that indication that they're interested in you and you do the application process online, they now have that $500 fee. So just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah. And then Pankaj says, employer NIC is on the Alberta Tech, but not the NOC. So you need them both, my friend. You need them both. Mm-hmm. Wow. And these guys are firing off questions. What are you guys doing? Okay. Well, Bright here. Thank you so much for your hard work. You guys are doing so much for us. Thank you once again. You're very, very welcome, Bright. I appreciate that. Okay. And Bob says he's really glad and proud of both me and you, Alicia. That's nice. And thanks again for this interesting show. My point is general. Is it good to put my 3 different work histories for bigger chance PNP? Big respects. Usually they target your primary NOC. Most of the PNPs, they do. But ultimately, if it's work history and they're looking for longer duration, then it doesn't hurt to put it in. When it comes to Express Entry and your profile, you never really want to put any work history that you're not getting points for. That's like low skill. You don't want to waste your time putting those in, or work history that's over 10 years. There's no real province that I'm aware of that will look at any work history that's older than 10 years. So you may not want to include those, but I don't know, Alicia, if you have any other thoughts on
but
that.
you do want to put it in your personal history. So just make sure that you have it. Yep. Even if you're not relying on it for points, make sure you put it in your personal history, because there have been cases at federal court where people have, applied for a work permit and they have failed to put in some of that older work experience, and that then gets held against them when they then try to do an application for a work permit and rely on the work experience that they didn't disclose before. So.
Yeah. And I'll just circle back with Pankaj. No, Pankaj, you're not eligible if your NOC code isn't on the list. So it's not good enough just for your employer to be working, to have a business in the industry. Your NOC code has to be on the list. All right. You're very welcome, Shane, my friend. Very, very welcome. Okay. Aniela says, hey, Mark, do I have to wait for the immigration officers to ask if I have any updates? Passport. I'm on tier to PR. Okay. Seriously, Aniela, you slid that one in there. No, just go and upload it. Absolutely. Take your passport, upload it through the web. If you have your acknowledgement of receipt on the tier to PR pathway, then upload it. If you don't, then wait for the ability to do that and then send it off. If they ask for anything, include the passport with it as an additional document. And yeah, that's what you can do. All right. Very welcome, Pankaj. And okay, Max has got one more here. He says, my location is restricted to Montreal. My boss and I don't know, and I now didn't know, and I now live in Toronto. Scared that will affect my PR. Max, I'm going to do this. Oh, wait a minute. It was quiet. Let's turn that up a little bit here. Okay, that's the symbol That's the sign for you to slide over here and let's take a look and see what happened. Book a consult with Alicia or myself, and let's dive in and see what happened. Because clearly, if the work permit says and it's confined to that particular region, then that's a big issue for you because you are working outside the confines of that work permit. All right. Okay, guys, we are going to wrap it up there. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Hopefully this was helpful. Alicia, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. And we will have lots more to talk about, but we wanted to bring this to your attention, explain it in multiple, at least multiple levels, kind of what's going on here, because everything works as one kind of synergistic whole. You can't just focus on the tech. You need to look at how, the Alberta Immigrant Nominee Program functions. And then within that, you can understand how to give yourself the best shot of success. So thanks, Max, and Yildiz, you're very, very welcome. All right. Thanks so much, Alicia. Take care, everyone.
Good day.